Welcome. Today I'll take you through the true, shocking story that ended with the disappearance of an unlucky married couple. The story takes place in Queensland, Australia, and was the inspiration for the movie Open Water. But before we begin, if you enjoy this content and want to see more, then please subscribe to my channel. It is deeply appreciated. This is the story of the Lonergans' disappearance. Tom and Eileen Lonergan were a practical, outgoing couple. They had spent the last portion of their lives on a Peace Corps mission in Fiji. Married in Texas on June 24, 1988, the two loved helping others in need. But their married life was hitting a rough spot, and both, but most notably Eileen, were not enjoying where their lives were heading. They both kept diaries that would later be analysed to find that neither was truly happy, and problems, some perhaps deadly, were becoming present. Contrary to their married life, there was one hobby that they both loved, and this was scuba diving. Originally coined by Eileen, Tom had become a keen diver as well, and they would dive whenever and wherever they could. Being Americans and working in Fiji, they decide they cannot miss the opportunity to visit Australia and dive the Great Barrier Reef. When the opportunity arises, they decide to take a short holiday to fulfill this dream. On the 25th of January, 1998, the two left their hostel to take the tour boat Outer Edge. With 26 other passengers, they head off out to sea. They were part of a novice group of divers, all eager and excited to see the Great Barrier Reef. Once aboard, they both stored their belongings under the bench and enjoyed the sea breeze as they advanced into the ocean. Approximately now 60 kilometers out from the coastline, the diving begins. The day was going by wonderfully, and both of them and their group were enjoying this experience. But as the day drew on, the captain declared that this would be the last dive. According to the captain, Tom and Eileen ask if they can take this dive solo, to which the captain agrees. However, he failed to record this in the log. The pair enjoyed their solo dive, and as the time elapsed, the two confident intermediate divers decide they had better resurface so they do not miss the boat. But to their surprise, when they eventually break the water's edge, the boat and the other divers were gone. They had been abandoned. Left in the ocean miles from land, coming to terms with their new reality, stranded in the ocean, the panic begins to kick in. Attempting to comfort one another, they remember that their belongings were left on the boat, and assumed that worst case scenario, the boat will return later once the captain realises his mistake. However, to their pure horror, and as the sun slowly dusked, they began to prepare for a night in the cold. Earlier on, when the rest of the group had previously resurfaced from their final dive, everyone had jumped aboard. The captain then initiated a head count to confirm everyone was present. He claimed after the fact that it was at this time that two divers must have got back into the water, and when they reboarded, he must have counted them again. Nevertheless, with an incorrect head count and 2 empty seats, the boat returned to shore. Later on, when locking down the boat for the night, the captain noticed some belongings had been left behind. He simply assumed they had been forgotten and somebody would be back shortly to collect them. He took them to the lost and found, where they would remain for 2 full days. But he was confident the owners would return soon to collect, and couldn't even imagine the reality of what was really going on. He then locked the boat and went home for the day, leaving Tom and Eileen alone in the dark. Later on in the day, the hostel had sent a shuttle to collect the Lonergans, only for them not to show The driver had looked far and wide for the two, but after failing to locate them, he went back to the hostel and just assumed they had walked back on their own accord. But by the time of the next morning, when the two still had not returned and their belongings had been untouched, the staff began to get concerned. But also, they felt it too soon to alert the authorities. The next day, the boat returned to the same spot, with operations continuing as normal. There was nothing out of the ordinary and nothing to challenge the state of calm and excitement amongst the new occupants of the boat. They even located 2 dive weights on the ocean floor and handed them in to the captain, who just thought of it as a lucky find. He failed to connect this to the events of the previous day. Tom and Eileen were doomed to another night in the water. Another day passed, and at the end of his shift, the captain noticed the Lonergans had still not collected their belongings. He decided to rummage around the bags and see if there was anything of note that could explain why. During his rummage, he spotted Tom's wallet. Concern then built in the captain. Why would someone not return for their wallet? He thought back to his head count and the dive weights he had recently found. And with a confirming action, he checked the shop's stock of dive suits. To his horror, he noticed that 2 were missing. Dread embellished him as he realized his grave error. Flipping into gear, he began preparing for the worst. It had been roughly 48 hours since the Lonergans had been on his boat, and the prognosis wasn't good. He phoned the authorities and prepped his boat, ready to return to sea, hoping that maybe, just maybe, they would still be alive and well. After the boat departed the dive spot on January 25th, Tom and Eileen were left alone in the water. The two were presumably panicked and flustered, but held strong early on. They did all they could to increase their chance of surviving. They dropped their weights and their diving equipment, keeping their lighter equipment to stay afloat. They wrote a final message on their dive slate, which they released to the mercy of the waves the day after, on the 26th. But unfortunately, all this was in vain. And as the hours turned into days, the two waited for the inevitable. We will never know exactly what their last 3 hours were like, but experts speculate they couldn't have lasted longer than 72 hours in those waters. And despite there being a heavy speculation of a shark attack, there was never any evidence to suggest this end. The most prevalent theory is that the two had slowly dehydrated and in a daze of confusion took their flotation equipment off, and eventually they would have drowned. After 3 days of search and rescue efforts, with nothing found, the search was called off. Over the next few years, various items and belongings would wash ashore. Some had their names on, and others were just speculated to be theirs. The belongings had minor damage and nothing to suggest a violent or predatory end. In June 1998, 75 miles up the coast, their dive slate would finally be located, revealing the couple's last words, a plea that would unfortunately go unanswered.